give us an update in. Hope that's okay in terms of being recorded. Jill, you're going to give us a bit of an update in terms of
that's great. Thank you.
Conference.
Yeah, lovely. So last week was the Unite Sectors Conference. So they have a general policy conference, and then on the years when there's not a general policy conference, they have sector conferences. So you meet and you talk within your sectors. I'm local authority sector, but we were all during the 1 week. All the sectors, 20 sectors, met in their sector groups in sort of plenaries where we came together, and Sharon Graham, our General Secretary, spoke. But other than that, all of the motions were passed through our sectors. So we, the caucus, supported by others, did some leafleting outside. It was obviously hard to catch people as they came and went, because there was smaller groups of conference people. But we distributed, I think, over 500 leaflets. I know Clara said 250, and that was halfway through the week. And I know they all went. I don't know if anyone's seen the leaflets. I can probably do a quick screen share to show them. But they basically were leaflets trying to draw in Unite delegates to engage with us in discussing climate. And on the back of it, it had all the different sectors, just to illustrate that this chiefly we all need to come together, because at the main conference, policy conference next year, it will be hopefully, so the theory goes, easier to engage across sectors if we've already had that early engagement. So we won't find ourselves having to, trying at the last minute some discussion with those other sectors and tried to relate the issues to them. So in terms of what happened in the individual sector conferences, so I'm local authorities, we and the community not-for-profit sector both had and the need for training and research into the impact of the climate and ecological emergency on our different sectors, how they will be impacted and how they need to respond. So those were those two. Other of motions, I mean, climate and just transition related, maybe not from the perspective that we might immediately come from, but from their own perspectives, which is really important that we understand where they are and what it is that they're being moved to debate. So construction had one on extreme weather, which ties in really well with the heat strike and cold strike projects that might come forward. So construction, and this wasn't through us, I bought one through on extreme. When I say us, sorry, I mean the climate caucus of Unite, who meet to see what we can bring forward. They also had one on climate change and health and safety. So those are obviously critical from a construction point of view. Automotive had 4 motions, all referencing the just transition and supply chain. Buses and net zero, wanting manufacturing of electric and low carbon vehicles to be carried out in the UK. So that was their angle. How can we take advantage of the just transition? And another one on upskilling. So those were important, different ranges of climate related motions that got brought forward. There was also from a local authority perspective, we had 2 motions that went to the Standing Orders Committee. So they got ruled out of order, but we went to speak to them to try and persuade them to put them on the agenda. They didn't, chiefly because they said these are not sectoral issues. And I mean, that is often the case with things that are climate related. So those two, they weren't really sector related to the local authority wholly. One was about Gaza and pensions. So it was, I mean, the impact of war on climate. So all of those obviously are very closely related. That was ruled out of order, even though the local government pension scheme is massive, and its impact on fossil fuels and its impact on wars. Those, I would say that definitely is sectoral. Rachel Reeves is looking at local authority pensions in a very specific way. So I think that was harsh to rule it out of order, but nonetheless that happened. And the other was a motion about protest, heavily leaning towards the impact on climate protest, but also the impact on, local on union protests. So we were saying some local authorities are still going out on strike. There was an agreement, but some local authorities did get strike mandates and are going that way. And the draconian protest laws that the previous government brought in, that Liberty successfully challenged in the High Court, but the previous government said, well, we're going to take it further and appeal that decision. Labour are now in government and continuing that appeal, which is really quite horrifying. So we wanted to bring forward a motion on that, but again, that was ruled not to be. Really, protest is bigger than just the sector. I mean, I agree on both of those, but if we wait for the policy conference next summer, you know, more horrific things are happening in Gaza and people are locked up as we speak. So it's disappointing, but I could see the logic why they rolled them out of order. But it was good to have the chance amongst that tight group of quite influential people within Unite to bring them forward, so they know they're up on our agenda. That's probably it. We collected 11 out of the 20 sector conference agendas, so there could well have been more, because you only get the agenda for your own sector, and because we haven't broken into all of the sectors, it's really hard to see exactly what's going on within those sectors and what could be going on. There were some areas where certainly we could look to increase. There were no motions brought forward by the services sector, which includes hospitality, and again that's a sector where I think that there is a big potential climate impact on hospitality. Health, I've brought them before. I know Ellen's here. I don't know if we just missed each other down there, Ellen, or if you weren't a delegate this time. But health, obviously, there's a great opportunity to bring forward more motions there. Road transport didn't have anything, but they had a previous motion remitted, so we need to follow up what was the outcome of that. And community didn't, but they brought forward 7 last time. So there is from all sectors, we're starting to see a push in slightly different aspects of how we can bring the climate and all the concerns wrapped up in that together. As I say, the key point really of this, rather than bringing forward sectoral, which is still very important, was to try and make those links cross sector. I mean, obviously we need them cross union as well, but cross sector within our own union was where we were aiming. So that's sort of a gallop through how the conference went. I think it was, generally every time we go, we meet more people. The conversations outside the hall are often the most productive. The conversations on the street, although it was wild and cold the first day, but after that things improved, and just in the bars. So it's a work in progress that we're putting on as hard as we can. I don't know. Any questions? Probably that's as much of a roundup as I have to offer.
Thanks very much, Jill. Really appreciate that. Can I suggest, because we also have another speaker, Laura, who's also quite time constrained, if you've got any questions directly for Jill, we've probably got time to take maybe a couple of very quick ones. But if it's more generally about trade union stuff in terms of climate, we're going to have that discussion a bit later. So, anybody? Suzanne?
Yeah, thanks, Jill. That was really interesting, very helpful, and not a bad model for how to organise around any union conference in terms of the work, connecting with delegates, fringe activities, and really making sense of the motions that are going forward. My quick question was this: I mean, I have had this conversation and others in the United Grassroots Caucus, but the TUC motion last year that we managed to get through, identifying a year of trade union climate campaigning. And my question is kind of, can you, hopefully you can, see some opportunities taken into union Unite branches, or more formally in terms of bigger conferences? I know we've missed one, but I'm just kind of asking that question about where are the opportunities to get that an engagement with. Well, I'll stop because otherwise I'm repeating myself. Thanks, Jill.
Yeah, no, great. Well, the main policy conference is next summer, and actually the closing date for motions is something like February the 21st. So we are needing very rapidly to get in to try and deliver some more names just onto a WhatsApp chat, which is where we do all sort of our brewing, and as many motions as we can. If we can prepare motions and then pass them out to different sectors, to not to throw the burden on anyone who's like newly interested, give them some pre-prepared stuff, then we will definitely be we're already having some sort of follow-up meetings of those on the WhatsApp already, to see now what do we do, what can we start crafting for the the main conference. And certainly, yeah, the TUC's motion, that's going to be a huge part of it. It's like, how is Unite taking this forward? What are you doing about it? So that will definitely feed into and just being able to reference it as well, when in discussion with colleagues, saying, this is because, trade union, climate group, grassroots, you sound a bit fringe. Do you know what I mean? So being able to say, no, this is the TUC are on board. Actually, it's the unions who need to step up. There's at high level, there's an understanding. At grassroots level, there's lots of different levels of understanding. But actually, where are the unions going to take this forward through their main structures? And our key asks, the not-for-profit and the local authorities one, was all about research, because unless we have the research into how it's going to affect our sectors, then only then can we really push forward on what we need to do in response.
Thanks, Jill. Taya, could I really cheekily just jump in? Just to that sounds great, Jill. That it's on the radar. Can I just cheekily throw in our a motion that's going forward to that my union and you, hopefully to our national conference, has as part of that motion to make the Brazil COP a key mobilizing moment for trade union activity. And I think if we can kind of generalize that. So yeah, I was just
absolutely. I mean, if we can get that in the minutes and then shared, we're absolutely not averse to filtering of other people. And so, if there's words in place and ideas in place, then that's brilliant. I think, as you say, you mentioned you've spoken to Clara, that's ringing bells with me. I think Clara has definitely got that on her radar. But if there's, yes, that would be really good. That'd be really good, because it's something that all unions need to push for together, speak with one voice. That's really, and as you say, that's a great opportunity. They're saying this is going to be the good one after so many bad COPs. But well, I mean, they've delivered some things, but we need to see something special and real.
Okay. If no one else has anything directly for Jill, we will come back to exactly those issues that Suzanne just mentioned in her contribution. So there'll be opportunity to talk about that. Jill, thank you so much for your time. I know you only had a brief amount of time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm glad it's being recorded. I will be catching up on the rest of it, because I really, aside from talking, I was down to count. I was, it was on my agenda before Clara said, would you mind speaking? Well, she said she couldn't. I said I will. So I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of it. Thank you very much.
Great stuff. Thank you.
Night, everybody. Cheers.
Okay. So similarly, we our second speaker also time constrained. So I'm very glad we've come to it in good time. Can I just ask for everybody to make sure they're muted, just because there's a little bit of sound coming through. And I'm very pleased to welcome Laura Verdasco, who is a Spanish socialist and member of Unison AQA, I think that's right. Laura's going to speak to us on the not so pleasant subject, I guess, of the terrible floods that have recently hit Valencia in Spain, and the impact of those. So Laura, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I think there has been a lot of coverage on what happened in Valencia around the 31st of October and the devastating floods that we suffered. I could go on for a very long time on the effect that's had on people. I'm sure people have seen the pictures of the streets covered in cars that have just been swept away by the floods that just came in without people being able to be ready. But I thought I'd also try and frame it in the context of the general trade union activity, and also the idea that climate change is not something that's looming in the future, is already here. So I'll start by saying that as it stands, there's 211 people that have tragically lost their lives as a result of the floods. This is the biggest disaster, certainly climate disaster, we've experienced in this century. Thousands have also lost their homes, their cars, and almost a month into what should have been the process of people getting some of their life back, they're still living under mud. There are some areas of Valencia, the region, that they haven't been even able to access at this point. So life is not back to normal at all, even a month later. And I think obviously the first thing that emerges from this circumstance is that it is so glaringly the effects of climate change. We haven't had a flood like this, even though this type of weather occurrences are more common than in other areas of Spain. This sort of cold rain that sweeps in at the end of the summer is not uncommon. Just the scale of it and the disaster that it created, it was unheard of. It had never happened, and that is purely because of climate change that we're having to face this. But I think what's really important as well is that we know and we can see how this was also a tragedy that unfortunately we couldn't by tackling climate change, but we could have also tackled the immediate consequences of it by taking a better political and a better trade union angle to it. And I talk about this because the warning in Spain, the risks of drought, the risks of flooding in certain areas of Spain, we've known for years that this could be a possibility, and yet it hasn't been necessarily acted upon. And actually, in fact, one of the first things that the regional sort of Tory type Pepe party, one of the first things they did was to cut the regional emergency service down, completely defund it and get rid of it, and instead channel the money into bullfighting, which I'm not sure if people are aware, but it's a huge sort of cultural war issue where the right wing just loves to keep sending public money to it as a way to dismantle the welfare state. So in that sense, it was Vox, the far-right party, that made it a condition for support of the new government that was instituted this year, that this was going to be the case. So right at the start of the mandate, if you will, it was already a condition that where this catastrophe is to strike, the Valencian people will be less prepared as a political decision. And so therefore, when the alarm came and it was time to actually act upon it, there was no resources, there was no infrastructure that could respond this quickly because of the inability to take the climate change emergency seriously. And so what happened on the day was that the alarm was raised days before, and yet on the morning of the floods, the population hadn't been warned at all that it was going to happen. It was only at 8 p.m. that people got an alert on their phones that they needed to get somewhere safe. At that point, people had already died. There was no way they could, if you were not already somewhere safe, there was no way you could make it somewhere safe by that point. And the reason why I bring up the activity of the trade unions and why this is also a trade union issue is circumstances like this. I mean, people that were on the ground and they highlighted the feeling, the possibility, the idea that came to them, that one of the reasons why this alarm came so late was quite simply that it was actually more profitable, it was actually more acceptable that people would go to work that day, that you didn't want to warn people so that they would go into work and sort of carry on as normal. And this resulted in more deaths, more people being affected than necessary. I mean, there's horrible stories of workers getting trapped inside warehouses and just being forced to spend the night there in sort of a warehouse that they were not sure was going to be flooded or not. Delivery drivers being told that they have to keep driving in the middle of the storm, and some people going missing because they're just in the middle of the workday and they have to drive as the street is sweeping them away by the flood. So it's really not far-fetched to believe that the reason why this wasn't taken very seriously to begin with was that the government, the companies were just incredibly more focused on profit making than in worker safety, which is why I think it's important that the trade unions are at the heart of this fight back. And even afterwards, in the aftermath that we're living in, workers are, the day after, almost immediately, they were expected to go back to work. Some people having lost their cars, having no means to get into their workplaces, were still told, well, you either figure out a way to work from home or get where you need to be, or we might fire you. So this has created a huge amount of anger amongst the Spanish population. People might have seen the scenes of the King of Spain visiting some of the affected villages, also the regional president visiting, and the sort of national precedent and getting mud thrown at them. I do welcome those images as a result of the inaction that all of those figures have taken to take the climate emergency seriously, and this emergency in particular. But I think also in Spain in particular, the trade union movement, the trade union sector is on the back foot. And they have hesitated to respond in a way that puts the sort of working class and people, the workers at the center of those affected and the people that have the potential to fight back. I mean, in Spain, we only had a general strike as recently as 2012. So it's incredibly disappointing that there's no more organization in that regard. But nevertheless, it's not just a question of, well, it's just terrible. We've also seen images of resistance. We've seen, networks of workers establishing lots of volunteering networks, bringing resources, true like self-activity, if you will, of workers, making sure that people are provided for. And seeing such as 300,000 people protesting on the 9th of November in the streets of Valencia, to put it into scale, that's the equivalent of 300,000 people showing up in Manchester for a protest. It's massive and it's very significant. And they're calling for Carlos Mazón, the regional president, to resign and potentially face criminal charges because he was unaccounted for on the day, even though he had been warned that this could be a disaster. So just to wrap it up, my two main points essentially are that climate change is here already. We're seeing this, we have been warned about it, and now it's just a question of mitigating sort of the scale of the disasters. Even though as much as the far right is trying to exploit this as some kind of, well, it's just a natural disaster, these things occur, we need to blame the central government because this, it is the climate change emergency that people have been warning us already come to get us today. And then just finally, it is crucially important that trade unions are able to react and shape the response for the sake of people affected. It was workers that were at the center of the response, but also workers that were mainly affected by the catastrophe. And I would welcome more activity by the trade unions to bring back that sort of militancy that people need to be doing now. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well, thank you, Laura. Really appreciate that. And it's as a story, I mean, it's kind of depressing and inspiring in different measures, I guess, given the activities. Would someone like to ask Laura anything? I mean, she's quite short on time as well. So if it's directly to Laura, that a comment now would be great. If it's more general, again, we'll come back to these issues straight afterwards. Claire.
So I just wondered how successful, you mentioned that like the far right trying to take advantage of it, and just talk about the central government, and I find it really depressing in the US how that the disasters they've had with hurricanes have been very much used in that way by people who deny climate change and used for their political advantage. And I wondered how much that had been successful in Spain by the far right.
I think originally concerningly very successful. I think the first couple of days there was a real concern that they were the ones dictating the narrative and they were the ones saying what the real causes were. And obviously climate change was not one of the reasons. They were blaming all sorts of problems that they see with the central government, such as not having enough money, and which is part of the issue, but it plays into the narrative that it's the state that's the problem, and they're this sort of revolutionary alternative that's going to bring about real change. Of course, what they mean by that is then they go on to scapegoat minorities and deny climate change. So initially, they did run with that, and I think there was an echo for their ideas. I think as time went on, fortunately, that has lost traction, partly because they are in government. They are the people that are responsible for the mismanagement of it. They support the regional government that makes the decisions. And so I think people have started to, maybe not from an anti-fascist perspective, reject their ideas, but at least from a position of we can see that you're lying. And so they try to call the demo on the 15th of November to frame everything in their way. And just as the one on the 9th of November got 300,000 people to come, they only managed 300 on the 15th of November, which is a very big difference. And it's one that was great to see, even though there's still 300 too many far-right activists, if you will, showing up. At least that shows they haven't managed to channel that anger into their reactionary ideas.
Thank you, Laura. And I suspect that in this country, if we were in that situation, that same process might well, maybe it's over optimistic, but I think that process will probably play itself out as well. Once you call out the far right on their lies and misleading claims, well, there's really no answer to it, is there? Anybody else before we allow Laura to depart? John.
Yeah, thanks. Just briefly, thanks very much, Laura. It's very sort of a moving, powerful description. I just wanted, the thing I picked up from your talk, what you said was, I thought was really important, was that the need for organization and creating networks. And you kind of suggested that maybe that organization and networking wasn't in place in the unions beforehand. And I think that, it is key for us, if we are going to organize for a year of trade, we're going to have a year of trade union activity, that we are well organized. So I just wondered if you had any kind of any advice or anything that you could add on what sort of organizations are springing up, or how that's working. Thanks.
I think that is the key question. I think we need to come out of situations like this, which will happen, with a clear plan on how the trade union movement could tackle them, were they to happen anywhere. And I think you need to, first of all, appear to be aware of the realities. One thing that the far right does very well is being able to describe the problem. They just say, well, you've lost your house. They can acknowledge that. And I think you need to start from the perspective that you're aware of what workers are going through, but then you have to be able to frame it in a way that it hasn't happened in Spain necessarily, but it is a workers' rights issue. And I think that is what cuts across, and what people are hoping to hear in this kind of circumstances. I think what the far right does, which is offer fake solutions for real problems, you have to fight that with the real solutions, and you have to put workers' rights and the workers' rights movement at the heart of that. Absolutely. I think the lesson is that you have to start building now. I think the process that has been carried out this last 10 years that we haven't had a general strike has been a process in which the trade union movement has lost importance. People have been sort of felt disillusioned with the trade union movement. People are not as involved. The trade unions, the biggest ones, have become less and less political, almost like capitulating to the bosses. And I think at that point, when disaster strikes, it's not too late, but it's so difficult to galvanize a new layer of people to fight in that particular instance. I think we need to fight desperately, especially in Britain, where we're not at that situation yet, to not lose that political edge, that militant edge that the trade unions need to have, because it will come a moment when we'll be tested. And I think it's a bit late by then to start talking to people about why they should join the trade union. So it's quite important that we're organized now. And I think it shows because quite a lot of people were drawing the links quite organically. They were saying, well, why did I have to be at work when it was my street was flooding and it seems like my boss doesn't care? So you can still have these conversations before anything happens, and hopefully build for when you have to be ready.
Okay, thank you. So Laura, thank you so much for that talk. Incredibly interesting, and all the best to you in kind of pursuing the situation in Valencia and in Spain, and with the trade unions as well. So we're going to let you go now so that we can move on. But thank you so much for your contribution. Really appreciated.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry I can't stay.
Okay, we're going to go to Claire now for a summary of the recent COP29. If you can cram that whole event into just a few minutes, Claire, that would be much appreciated.
Well, it was all a load of rubbish. They are summarised. No, slightly longer version. I mean, you know, expectations were obviously low. It was being hosted yet again in a petrostate, yeah, the quality, you know, the hosting of it, same as last year, but you know, very fossil fuel dominated, but even worse in terms of the organisation. The huge thing, which I'm sure you've read about, is about the finance deal that was agreed, that fell so far short of what was needed, and the COP was due to finish on the Friday, and it wasn't until that Friday afternoon that there was a text release which actually had numbers on the climate finance deal. So not, you know, developing countries were sort of outraged because they, for the first time, come together around putting a figure on how much which was needed, which was $1.3 trillion a year. And then this piece of paper comes out that the developed countries were offering 250 billion, and that there wasn't even any clarity about what that would be made up of. So it included direct finance, but also what they called like mobilized finance from the private sector. So the situation was that this was so late in the day, and they were being put under not just the normal amount of pressure at these negotiations, but also a threat that if they refused to accept this deal, which eventually, you know, then got pushed up to 300 billion, if they refused to accept it, then from January, with a Trump presidency in the US, that they would, you know, a threat that, well, you know, accept this, or you know, there might be nothing for you next year. But it's been pointed out that this doesn't. There is already kind of aid and develop, you know, multilateral funding in the pipeline that would actually meet this figure, and then inflation and stuff. It's not really promising anything new, and it was something that has just been seen as a massive betrayal by those countries which are on the front line of climate change, that such a sort of pathetic figure has been the most that they've been offered. And although this was kind of, you know, gavelled down by the presidency, excuse me, some countries, and notably India and Nigeria, said at the end, you know, this has been put through without our consent, we object. So that failure on finance was the you know, biggest thing that didn't come out of the COP. Other notable things were that there was hope that there would be some text that reinforced the agreement last year, that there needed to be a transition away from fossil fuels, which you know, it took so long for that to find its way into a COP text, and did last year. But then pressure from, well, notably Saudi Arabia, but they won't have been alone. It sort of kept that out, and that was then, so that's been pushed back to next year. There was a big concern about Argentina pulling the delegation out, and this was sort of, you know, it's been seen as the sort of, is this the early signs of, you know, unraveling, that other far right countries are going to follow Trump by wanting to pull out of Paris? I mean, Argentina's government has apparently since said that they're not going to pull out of the Paris Agreement, but it does give a sense of just how fragile this process is. And then the final thing that's notable is that ever since the Paris Agreement, there have been ongoing negotiations about the rules for carbon market trading, and this has kept being pushed back and back because the rules that have been proposed have been said, well, that's not good enough, that leaves loopholes, it's not transparent enough. And there was a big push in Azerbaijan, and some sort of quite dodgy procedural means used to agree one part of it on the very first day, sort of steamroller it, and other parts were negotiated later in the conference. And this has been like, oh look, we achieved something, but there are real concerns about the rules, because there's some extent to which loopholes have been closed, but there's still no kind of real repercussions if countries don't abide by these rules for what carbon credits they can use. There's not enough transparency.
Someone needs to mute themselves, please.
Yeah. There's so there's issues about, well, how long is this carbon, if it's counted as negative, how long is it actually stored for? Because we've all seen these things about we say we've planted a forest or protect a forest, there's wildfires. So, some of these are just very temporary things. So all these concerns. And one thing we've got to remember is that when it comes to these carbon trading mechanisms, there's a lot of bad actors out there. There's not, you can't regulate these things assuming that these corporations are acting in good faith, because there's been expose after another showing that there's just literally kind of scams out there. And so there's just another thing that we need to be concerned about. But as Suzanne's already mentioned, the big thing is next year it's a big COP, and how it can not just try and rectify some of this, but the whole process, how it's going to hold together in the face of having Trump in the US announcing that he's going to pull out of Paris. So a lot coming next year, really.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Appreciate that update. And not much encouragement to be found, it has to be said. And I think a lot rides on next year in Brazil, because that's a bit of a make or break in terms of who's hosting it versus other countries, the political nature of who's in power there. We do need to move on to the trade union aspect of the meeting, as per the title of the meeting. But if anyone does have any other thoughts or comments on COP, there's a couple of minutes in which to squeeze those in. Linda.
Did you hear whether there was much discussion about the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty? And I think this is something that would be really great to get all the unions to start talking about. Unison is now the biggest union in the world to support it. If we could get some of the other unions to support the fossil fuel treaty, that will help to put pressure on our government to eventually support it. Manchester City Council has just decided to support it. Glasgow's just supported it. So we need lots more cities, lots more organisations. But if we get unions involved, because the problem with the COP is that it's all lowest common denominator, really, because everybody has to agree. And the fossil fuel treaty will start with a small number of countries coming together, and then the UN will negotiate the treaty. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. And I think I'm right in thinking there are a number of countries signed up to it, but not amongst the more powerful elements, let's say.
It's only 14 countries so far. Yeah. Most of the small island states and Colombia.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you, Claire. Appreciate the summary. And I think building towards next year will be a key part of this next part of the discussion anyway. So yes, I mean, this meeting is called Building for a Year of Trade Union Action, and that is really what we want to talk about for the rest of this meeting, how we get there and the activities that we undertake to do so. So I'm going to ask Suzanne really to kick us off with that.
Yeah, thanks Tahir. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Laura's contribution earlier on about Spain and the importance of a trade union and working class response to the extreme weather, the climate crisis as a lived reality. I thought she put that very, very well, and how important it is that or the opposite. If that's not there, then the narrative absolutely and the response can be pulled to the right. We live in a polarized society, so the extreme weather events that are occurring are not necessarily tipping points in the direction of we need to take action to tackle the climate change. They can be tipping points that pull further to the right and reinforce that political interpretation of what is happening in society and what the solutions are: authoritarian, fascist, right-wing government, etc. So I think that's a really excellent framing. The first starting point for us, obviously, was to get that motion through TUC conference. There were many contradictions in what was passed at TUC conference this year, but nevertheless, there is policy there that says the climate crisis is a class and trade union issue that affects all workers and jobs. And you can see that so clearly when you look at the events that have occurred in Valencia. It wasn't just energy workers that are impacted by the climate crisis. It was all workers whose jobs, workplaces, communities are impacted by an escalating a climate crisis that is a lived reality, and as Laura said, not the future. So getting that motion through TUC conference is an excellent start, but we all know that can easily stay a piece of policy paper with a few bland emails that go out and result in absolutely nothing very real or significant happening. So we have to build the networks that people have been talking about in order to make it a really significant year of trade union climate campaigning. And as the motion, we kept it, I think we managed to keep it in the motion, that we work with broader coalitions, climate justice groups, etc., in the activities that we do, which is really bloody important as well. Now, I'm going to talk about what has happened so far in the NEU, which is my union. So I'm going to put out there some of the things that we are doing, with the hope that ideas are there that are worth sharing, and that others pick them up and begin collaborating and perhaps putting some of the same things in place in terms of their own unions. And it was great to hear Jill's response in terms of my question at the beginning of the meeting. So I'm going to share what we're doing so far in terms of the NEU, and that is to hopefully, in order to sort of see where there can be collaboration, see where we can coordinate, and it's a start. So we have a motion which for us in the NEU, our conference motions come as a result of local branches supporting said motions. They would then go forward, and then we have another round of prioritising motions as to what goes to conference. Now, the motion that's been circulated, and it's been done by our NEU network, so I don't know whatever networks that work. The Grassroots Unite Caucus clearly is a network that works, but I'm pleased to say that we managed to pass it in my branch yesterday. That's Waltham Forest NEU. So there's a number of branches are passing this, and hopefully we'll end up getting it prioritised for conference. So key elements in that motion is a repetition of that statement that's in the TUC motion. The climate emergency will affect all jobs and all workers. It's a key trade union issue for us all. Acknowledging that the TUC have called for a year of trade union climate action, including engagement with community and climate justice groups, as I've just said. And that the TUC also passed support for for the heat strike, for the concept of the heat strike. Conference recognises, and then we focus on our issues, that schools are at risk from extreme weather, flooding, and high fossil fuel energy bills. That insufficiently addressed existential threat of the climate and ecological crisis are contributing factor to the epidemic of mental ill health amongst young people. So the curriculum and the recognition, the dissonance between what's happening in the world and what happens in schools is so large, it doesn't support our young people in terms of having some agency in relation to the climate crisis. And also, interestingly, in terms of what Linda has just meant, no, I'll come back to it, and that schools, conference believes the UK should support and implement Brazil's proposal for a global 2% tax on all billionaires to fund Global South green transition, and a tax on all billionaires to raise 1.3 trillion needed for the just transition globally, and that schools should teach the realities of the climate ecological crisis. And there's a curriculum review, and we've inputted into the curriculum review, hopefully, that, you know, to try and ensure that this occurs. Now, these were our conference resolves. As I say, it hasn't yet gone to conference. Our conference is always at Easter. We're circulating and trying to get that motion passed in as many branches as possible, and hopefully get it prioritised for conference. So our resolves were as follows. Conference recognises the need to sharply increase union capacity to build for a year of trade union climate action, which should start in September 2025. I'm really keen that we don't push everything into 2026. It's far too far away. Now, September works for us in terms of schools and academic year. I think it may also work for others as well, because it gives sufficient build-up to the second point here, that the Brazil COP should be a key mobilizing moment. Now, that just gives us some broad flexibility to think about how we organize and mobilize for that key moment. Claire's done the update. Brazil COP, I don't think it will come up with the things that we need. No COP ever has, but it is COP 30. It's 30 years since the COP process began. It is in the Amazon, in the symbol of the failure of the COP to tackle the climate crisis and do the things that need to happen. And currently, obviously, the Brazilian government is not the far-right government that exists in other parts of Latin America, but also globally as well. And it provides that focus for mobilization, but also what should it look like if we were really tackling the climate crisis? So I'm really keen to kind of encourage unions to add that in as a key mobilizing moment. And then we can build some flexibility into what we do. Who knows how big, how substantial we could make it. Finally, conference instructs executive to sign the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. So Linda, if this motion gets passed, then you will be signed up to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty as well. Then we've also got to call for a climate and ecological education conference. Now, we did this in 2019, where we had activists from across the NU attend a really successful conference. Again, people might want to think about that in terms of their own sectoral conferences that could be held to further understand, locate solutions, and build activism. And the rest of it is really kind of more specific to our union. Green bargaining for reps, a network of district green officers, for schools to have sustainability leads. And finally, though, this is a bullet point, I think, which all unions could maybe think about: establish a committee of executive members to work with the NEU Climate Change Network. So that's our network, and the Health and Safety Executive, which is where quite a lot of this stuff can sit, to take these forward, to take these issues forward. So if we get that past at conference, we're building some structures in the union, some capacity in the union, along with the activists on the ground, to make some of this happen. Now, just one final thing for me. Sarah Lyons, who's the General Secretary of the Bakers Union, also is very much on board of this. Just to feedback, she can't make this meeting, but just to feedback from her what's happening in terms of the Bakers Union. She says this: we weren't able to tie things down at our November executive because we were running out of time on a number of issues that were priorities, including job losses, etc. But we have an additional day scheduled in for our next meeting at the beginning of February, by which point there will be a plan pulled together from TC Motion, and discussions that happen at meetings like this, to the Bakers Union executive, to get that supported and part of their policy going forward into 2025-26 for the year of trade union climate campaigning. So I suppose that also is an encouragement for us to keep coming up with ideas. So I just think, we have an opportunity here with, as Jill said, with an official policy, which could be nothing, or it could be something really important and really significant, and help us to win more important debates amongst most trade unionists about the nature and the importance for workers of the climate crisis and of tackling the climate crisis. So I think there are some great opportunities for us here to build on that. These meetings and others obviously are really vital to building up those networks, sharing ideas, and I'll stop there.
All right, thanks, Suzanne. I mean, it does sound like that motion is, the content of that motion is something that could and should be cribbed from by other unions as well, in trying to put something together to go through their conferences, because there is a definite plan there. Let's dive straight into any discussion. I'll put John and Liz on immediate standby just in case there are no takers straight away. But if anybody wants to come in with thoughts, comments, ideas. In that case, let's go first to John then. See, Charlotte's coming, but John, do you want to go first, and then I'll bring Charlotte in.
Charlotte's an activist in my union, and I dare not sort of cut across her. So Charlotte first, and then me, please.
Go ahead, Charlotte.
That's very gracious of you, John. I'm not sure. So I want to float an idea, because this is a forum for hopefully where people can go, yeah, that's a good idea, that's a really terrible idea. Because I spoke at, I did a workshop at a day organised by Sheffield Trades Council and various other people. It was on the 9th of November, so it clashed with the Energy Strategy Day. But I ran a workshop and it was on public sector response to the climate challenge. So it was mostly people involved in education or health. And I'd also done a trade union thing a week before or something at an event in Manchester with Global Justice Now, where we had a trade union workshop. And one of the questions always is how do we get trade unionists engaged in this? How do we actually, other than the people who are already kind of climate aware, if you want to use that term, how do we get other people in the room with us so we are talking to a wider audience all the time? And one of the challenges actually put at the trade union event in Manchester was, we kind of put conferences on about a just transition, but a lot of the workers who we're really talking about are not in the room. It's PCS and Unison talking about a just transition for fossil fuel workers, and they're not actually there. And I think that in some ways that actually made me think, that is a bit of a fair challenge. So how do we grapple with that? But one of the things I was wondering was instead of trying to put on events where we're trying to talk about a just transition for all workers at the same event, would it make sense to put on kind of events where you've got workers from a particular sector but from different unions talking about the topic, if you like? So one of the things the reason I put my hand up was because Suzanne mentioned the Climate and Ecological Conference, because I work in education, but I'm in PCS. But it kind of feels like if we had a conference on education, you could bring together PCS, UCU, NEU, like make sure FE, someone said don't forget FE as well, because it's always about higher education and schools, but actually have a conference where you're talking about what do we need to do within education across all education workers, in some ways. And this kind of comes back to the thing that maybe John might talk about as well, is PCS has had this idea, being kind of championing the idea for a while of you know, a national climate service, but talking about the fact that you need to involve other people. You know, if you're talking about health, you have to involve health workers. It can't just be what the civil servants think. And I'm just wondering, I mean, this is purely an idea. If everybody thinks it's terrible, I'll take that. Do you know what I mean? Is like, should we be trying to do kind of sector-based conferences? And in that way, we can engage more directly with people that we are working with, rather than me as a PCS member working in education, trying to engage with aviation workers about what they should do on aviation. You know, should we have a more sectorial view to it? Or is that too sectional? Is that a backward step? Up to you to decide. Thanks.
I suspect there are arguments both ways on that, Charlotte. But John, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you. First of all, I think we have to experiment. One of the things that really intensely annoys me in the trade union movement is people say somebody has a good idea, and somebody says, "Oh," and then find 55 reasons why you can't do it, and then actually we don't do anything. So certainly PCS stands ready to join with any other union, do any activity. But I think we should just experiment. So if somebody could come up with a credible sectorial conference or event, then certainly I would move my level best to get our national executive to support that. And certainly I think our climate change committee would be more than happy to work with other unions in any way possible. Now, we certainly have a number of events planned for next year, obviously around the COP. And so we're more than happy to work with colleagues. So if somebody wants to suggest a working party of various people to get together early in the new year, then PCS will send people to that, and we'll back it up with money and publicity as well. Our particular focus is not only obviously around COP, but be around the first green pay claim or green claim that we're going to put in against the government, we hope in the new year. And what we're intending to do is that claim is not going to be a passive piece of propaganda. Though obviously, maybe like pay claims, sometimes they do tend to be work out that way. But we genuinely want to campaign around the claim. And certainly I've made it very clear to colleagues, is if the claim isn't met, then we should consider, can we have a trade dispute and go on strike? Because I think if one union went on strike around climate change issues, and I'm not saying that would be a catalyst for every other union, but one, it would show that under the law you can do it. But secondly, it would force unions like PCS to reach out, as colleagues have said, and Charlotte has indicated, to go beyond it, if you like, and certainly in PCS, a very small layer of activists to actually make the arguments to mass membership. Now, that might be impossible, that might be futile, but I think it's important that we try, because given the scale of the crisis, I think the terrible thing would be if we look back and said, we didn't do it because we thought it would be either too difficult or it seemed impractical, when in fact some of the best campaigns I ever been in have been, from the beginning, have looked very sort of like not very rational, or not very well rooted in what most people consider where the members were. Give two quick examples. There's a 4-day week campaign being run in one of our groups, that's our subsections union. The people who started it were told that it's impossible, members don't care about that. Yet that's big. That is probably the biggest and most active campaign the union now has, that has mobilized more members than, I'll be blunt, than around pay. And similarly, many years ago, I remember somebody said, we were campaigning against a move from central London to Docklands, as it was called in those days. And somebody said we should hold a breakfast at Docklands to show people just how difficult it is to get to Docklands. And I thought it was a mad idea. I thought you'll just get the branch executive committee, we actually got 600 people turn up. So there's lots of times I think we actually stop ourselves doing, if you like, experimental work because we've already worked out in advance nobody will do it, when in fact actually sometimes it just requires somebody to make that call. So just to really repeat and end is that PCS wants to work with any union that wants to work with us on any particular campaign. I certainly think we should experiment. And if it fails, it fails. The worst comes to worst. It is, well, for PCS, is we lose some time and we lose some money. But I'd rather have that than turn around when somebody said that was a really good idea. I wish somebody had actually done it. So we stand ready to work with other unions. Just very quickly about the TUC. I mean, I agree with colleagues who probably are sceptical of what the TUC won't do around this, despite the very clear motion that was passed. Certainly PCS wants to reach out, if it can, to Unite, GMB and other industrial unions. I mean, we were recently, and I'll start to come to an end to here because I'm going on too long and I apologise. We recently, and you were there as well, Tahir, where 60 environmental groups had worked with Unite around a plan for transition that Unite region in Scotland supported about oil and gas in Scotland. So it was actually, in essence, the Green Movement linking up with the industrial workers of the North Sea Isle to come with a plan. And we were more than happy to join them. And the more types of initiatives we can do, where I know Unite is quite federal, so as I understand it, it may be possible that sectors can make proposals. And I think it was indicated earlier on that sectors are looking at things, say, for instance, mass green bus, mass EV bus construction in this country. I'm sure there'll be other manufacturing fallouts from proposals. Just to say that I think it's vitally important that unions like PCS get involved with that as well, because otherwise, and this is a real worry for me, is that divide that I think many of us have talked about will gradually build up over time, or not gradually, it'll be very fast, where people in manufacturing industry say all white collar unions could say to us is how we should lose our jobs. If we can't give workers hope in these industries, then they will turn to the far right, who will actually tell them you don't have to make any sacrifices, because either climate change is not real, or even it is, it will affect other countries, despite the overwhelming evidence that people will see in their eyes and experience when they walk out and see the changing climate. So, as I said, I'll just end it on PCS stands ready to work with any other union and any project that people propose to us. And just saying to Charlotte, I'd be more than happy to have a chat with her and let's see what we can do.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate that. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. Really, there's opportunities to do both cross-sectoral and cross-union within sectors. Why wouldn't you do both of those things? Debbie.
Yeah, I can see Tony's here from UCU as well, and I think he was in the meeting that I was in. We had our UCU Climate and Ecological Emergency Committee annual meeting, and there was discussion about empowering workers to build for a just and sustainable future, and empowering learners, and a lot of interesting things were said. We heard from the PCS about their climate plan, and we were reminded about Platform doing the bottom-up stuff, not talking to the workers about just transition, but talking to them about their jobs. I mean, I think a key theme was start from where people are. Don't go in to raise their awareness. Start from their concerns, their interests. Somebody mentioned a training thing where they started with, here's a picture of a t-shirt, now make it look like an eco-activist. So really drawing out from, the union learning people, where they were starting from on that. Another thing was the link I've already put in the chat. I haven't had time to read it yet, but this new Lucas plan for the 21st century, it's around arms conversion. So things like that, where people are actually looking at what they could do, and like the Lucas plan did back in the 70s, and also trying to learn lessons from successful campaigns such as the anti-fracking. I mean, that wasn't a trade union campaign, but I don't think, but it was successful. And Culture Unstained, ending fossil fuel sponsorship in various museums and galleries and the arts and so on. I mean, I think it's really important that it's not just the unions, but that we're reaching out and we're working with environmental groups. And, you know, we haven't got there yet in ways that I think some of the Scottish unions did, the Scottish TUC and Friends of the Earth and so on. And just to finish, UCU do training for reps or for members, you know, and they are going to be having training about working with community groups. And as a retired member, I think that's important as well, you know, not having a workplace to go and be a nuisance in, sort of see what they come up with in the way of outreach. Though it was interesting being in a breakout room about empowering learners, just to challenge some of the very didactic ways that teachers talk, you know, as if they know everything and the students know nothing. And that's never been true for me. I've learned more from my students than I've ever, I'm sure, taught them. You know, and the challenging ways that students, and I mean, I'm extending this to sort of how to work with workers as well. We all have a contribution to make. Nobody's starting from nowhere. Just because we're on this Zoom call, we're not the be all and end all of experts.
Thank you, Debbie. Liz, can I call you in next, possibly?
Yeah, thanks to hear. You're lucky actually, because my battery just went and I was temporarily out of the meeting, but I've just managed to get back. So yeah, I mean, thanks everybody. Really interesting discussion actually that's started to take place. So I'm from Unison on the NEC, and there's a group of us on the NEC and wider than that who've been campaigning about prioritising the climate emergency and what we do about it. So we were part of, getting the motions to the TUC, and one of the, getting sort of holding firm on that motion. And just a couple of quick things, because I thought it was really interesting what Charlotte raised actually in terms of how we organise going forward. I think I'm in the we have to try everything camp. I have to say some things will work and some things won't. But one of the things we consciously did at TUC, because Unison does actually organise in the energy sector, and people forget it's not the biggest sector that we have, but people often forget that. And we made sure that one of the people who proposed our motion at TUC was somebody who worked in the energy sector. Actually, we thought that was quite important. Having said that, one of the things that I thought was really that helped us get the positive motions passed at TUC is because we had kind of an argument isn't the right word, but we pushed to make it clear that the climate emergency is wider than a sectoral issue, because traditionally what the TUC does is says this union organises in that sector, they'll lead the debate on this and we have to accept what they say is policy. And that really has been why in the last 2 or 3 years, actually, the motions on the climate emergency and other things were getting worse and worse, because they were being led from the lowest common denominator, which is about saving jobs, rather than actually about something that affects us all, which is saving the planet. And it was important that we broke out of that sectoral thing this year. And Unison was actually quite keen doing that, even though we made it clear that we wanted our energy workers involved and leading in the fight for just transition. So I think there's a lot of scope at a grassroots level for looking at how we organise across the different industries. we need to make sure that that doesn't slip back into those industries at the top decide what happens. So that's where I think I'm in the camp, the camp of let's have a go at everything and look at what works and be ready to adapt what doesn't work and think things through in that way. So I think I mean, I think it was Ellen put in the chat that we'd agreed to have the year of 2026 for the year of climate activism in Unison, which we have. I mean, we almost had already, because we had it in our motion that went to a national conference in the summer and then included that in the TUC one to make that part of what the TUC adopted as well. We had to then formally do it, which we did at a recent meeting. In terms of actually the detail of what we're going to start planning, this meeting's a week too early in many ways because our NEC is next week, and I think that's where we'll have some of the discussions. However, I think there are a number of kind of specific demands that we can already start thinking about and start doing. And I mean, I very much agree that although we're talking about the 2026 being the year of, actually the COP events will be in November, early December of 2025. And we need to do something that coincides with that almost launches the following year of climate activism, is how I see it, really. So we can build on the debates that take place there, either highlighting, I mean, somebody said COPs never deliver, and generally agree with that. So highlights what they haven't delivered and what that means that we need to do, and tie that in, I think, actually with some of the things that Laura talked about in terms of trade unions being at the fore of that will be really quite important. So that does require us not thinking about what we're going to do in January 2026. It requires us all in our trade unions starting to think now about what we want to have come to fruition in November 2025, if you like. So I like some of the demands that Suzanne had in hers, and I think we should all think in our unions of what are some of the specific demands that we can raise. So I mean, for instance, divestment is a huge issue at the moment, but actually continuing for us in local government, divesting our pension fund from the fossil fuel industry is really quite important. I mean, how we've turned it around in my individual branch is we want ethical investment, and we've highlighted that's we don't want our pensions invested in wars, occupations, the arms industry, or the fossil fuel industry. And we've been campaigning around fossil fuel industry for some years, so we don't want to drop that. We want to keep that up there as a high profile. So there's quite a lot then you can start talking about happening around that. There's I think, I mean, there's some really good stuff out, obviously, about a just transition and what it means. So in unions where that's specific to what the union is, we need to start trying to win arguments about that, as well as across all unions, the broader argument about what a just transition means. Because if you're going to say, for instance, transitioning some of the, for want of a better phrase, fossil fuel jobs into things that can help with medicine or whatever, or the NHS, actually we should be involving our health workers in that as well. So there's a lot of scope, I think, for involving lots of people. We have to think about how we're going to get that ball rolling. And actually, the fact that we're confronted with, having now I can't think of a better way to describe him other than a racist, misogynistic, bigoted climate denier going to be the next president of the US, I think is a way that we can mobilize people, actually, because people will start to see that threat coming much larger again on the agenda. So I think, but we have to start doing it now, and that means having a bit of a plan, talking, amongst ourselves to already existing activists. But how do we broaden out more local branches that will take up this issue to bring things to a national level as well? So I haven't got the most thought out plan for Unison because we haven't got the most thought out plan yet. We're starting to put that in process, but I do think the building for something that happens to kick off our year a month early around COP is really quite important. And I do think starting to think and pin down some of the things that you can do specific in your union would be good, whilst also then looking at how we can do that general appeal of have the growth of, far right populist. Actually, I'm not going to use the word populist because I don't think it automatically fits, but far right climate denying politicians makes it a very real threat again at the top of the agenda as we approach the COP25. I think will have to be the way to mobilise through those bigger politics of back to, you know, there is no plan B. All the things that mobilised us pre-pandemic in 2019 around the youth strikes and stuff, I think can happen again if we start to put that call out. So, for instance, I mean, it hasn't even been agreed, but I've started mooting in Unison that our guest speaker at our conference in 2026, I want us to invite Greta Thunberg to come and speak to a bunch of significantly older trade unionists about why we need to be active around the same, you know, on the same page, if you like, as she is, and much younger people are. I'm hoping that the union will agree to invite her, and I'm hoping that she can make it, because I think it would make a huge difference to what we do. If we don't, we'll, you know, I'll be arguing for somebody else who can make a difference. But that, you know, that kind of thing at the top of the unions, but also organising at the bottom, I think has to be how we approach it. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Liz. Yeah, does anybody else want to come in? Phil.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Phil. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I'm Phil I'm a BEC2 member. I'm part of the Bridgewater Trades Union Council. And we recently ran an event called How Green is Your Workplace, which Tahir kindly came and spoke at, inspirationally spoke at. And we had Young Somerset involved. So arguably, it was certainly one of the kind of best bits of the session, was where two young parliamentarians spoke very passionately from their perspective about the whole climate and biodiversity catastrophe. Now, I don't think either of them were union members. They were both very young, and they probably weren't even thinking of becoming them. But it was a really interesting moment to bring those young people together into a trade union context. And it has led to an agreement to do a joint session with the Youth Parliament in Somerset and the Bridgewater Trades Council, or possibly other trades councils as well. So I suppose what I'm really saying, I'm hearing from what Debbie said, you know, that I think it's really important to engage with young people. And what I noticed, I was on an RMT march in Bristol a few months back during all the rail stoppages, and XR, Extinction Rebellion, joined in the march. And I was really moved by that. I thought, well, that's amazing. They've noticed this is happening and they've all come out to support it. I don't see the Trades Council support. I mean, it happens. It happens on an individual basis. But where's that linkage? It's not very obvious if it happens at all. And I just think we have to, as trade union, I mean, I've been a trade union member all my life. We've got to kind of step out of we have to look over our parapet really and engage with it in order to, if there's any chance at all of solving this catastrophic crisis that we face, multiple crises, we have to be talking to everybody. We all have to pull together. I was up at COP26 and I saw that happening around the fringes of that event, that the numbers of different groups that were coming together, and it was a really actually very empowering event from my point of view, because I just heard so much great stuff. The other thought I had about all this was, I think Brazil in itself is an opportunity, obviously, because it's the next COP. But I was involved in making a film there in the 1980s with in which basically it was a group of trade unionists working with medics. We were all staying in a hospital right out in the middle of nowhere in the Brazilian highlands. And the action that was going on was that they were trying to support farmers who were being driven off their land, forced to go up to Amazonas, into the Amazon forests to farm, being told that there were rich pickings up there and encouraged to leave their land and go. And guess who was trying to force them out? Obviously, it was people like McDonald's and the other big beef companies that were doing it. So when they say, you know, as they were saying at the time, we don't farm in Amazonas. No. We just drive other people off their much more suitable land for growing beef, in order that we can use it and they can all go and start pulling the rainforest down and cause a lot of problems, and for all they care, die. And of course, they were killing people, and it was all. I guess what I'm saying is that the medics who were driving this film, what they chose to do to theme it was really to remind people locally that this wasn't a new syndrome. The very farmers that were being driven off their land, their fathers and grandfathers had been driven off even better land further south, down in Minas Gerais and north of Rio, up into the highlands, and now they were being driven up to Amazonas. There's all the same people doing all that, putting all that pressure on them. So I just wonder whether there's something around that kind of historical link. And of course, at the other end of it, and we saw a lot of them at COP, and again, among the most moving speeches I heard were from the indigenous people themselves. And if those people, if we can be linked right across the board with the indigenous people in Brazil, the trade unionists in Brazil, the young people in this country who care about this passionately, because they're the ones that are going to have to put up with the mess we've made, then maybe we're onto something.
Thanks, Phil. That's excellent, and how brilliant those young speakers were at your event. That really was superb. Okay, we're coming towards the end. So, is anybody else want to come in quickly before I kind of invite back our other speakers? Okay, it's perfect timing at the moment, so that's great. But I feel like in the discussion, though, we've kind of converged around a couple of things, really, which is the kind of plan of action that's laid out in the NEU motion, which I hope will become policy, and I hope other unions will pick up and adopt. But also this idea of, trying to get not only cross-sectoral working, but also different unions within sectors. It's almost like trying to find the right unit that will galvanise people through a kind of common interest and common concern. And I think that's something we need to think about, and where to take that will be really important over the next year. Okay, I'm going to very quickly ask if Liz, I saw you just posted something there. Liz and John, did you want to just quickly make a final contribution, and then I'll come back to Suzanne?
I suppose, I mean, what I just posted in the chat, if people haven't seen it, because Suzanne referred to it as well, but coming back on what Phil is just saying, we did actually manage to keep it into the TUC motion about working with, climate activists and climate justice groups. So I think, we should use the fact that it's in there to try and make it happen as well. I'm glad that people will be over the moon if Greta Thunberg spoke somewhere. I like to aim big. We haven't done anything to even get it agreed, never mind to make it happen. But if you don't aim big, it's not going to happen, is it? So yeah, and I think that's true of everything we do. Actually, we need to be aiming big, and we need, there is literally, a world that to win here. And if we don't have those big aspirations, we won't actually manage to do the how do we get there steps, which is some of the detailed work. So yeah, I think it would be really good to share motions that have already been passed, and for us to think about how we can adapt them for our own unions. But also, do we need to take something back to our own unions' national conferences if we've already got policy? What do we want to add to it? What do we need to do at the TUC next year to make to try and make some of these things happen? Do we want to do it by motions? Do we want to do it by fringe meetings? Do we, how do we want a mixture of both? How do we want to do that? Because the trade union movement is littered with motions with the right position in them that nothing happens. And our job is to make sure that something happens. There are also loads of motions that are passed where things do happen. So it is possible, but we need to make sure that it happens with this one. So I think that's the task for all of us on this meeting, really, isn't it? Thanks.
All right, thanks a lot, Liz. John?
Nothing really more to add, except obviously that, as said, PCS stands ready to help in any way practically we can, because I do agree what we have to do now is be practical. Doesn't mean that we can't have policy positions, and clearly policy positions underpin practical work because they give them directions. But I'm not claiming just any action is better than a policy, but actually in a crisis, the key thing we need to do, mobilisation. Certainly my union is very poor at mobilising people around this issue. And so working with other unions obviously helps that. But also it's a thing that we have to learn in our own union ourselves, or particularly PCS, but probably no doubt in other unions, about how can we mobilise the so-called ordinary members around this. I think most people care about this issue, are aware about this issue, maybe not in every nuance. And the trick, which certainly PCS has not managed to pull off at all, is to match, if you like, that latent goodwill towards this sort of campaign with actually getting them to do things, or us being the proper catalyst for them to do things. So certainly that's the key thing for PCS to learn this year or the year to come. But as I said, we stand ready to work with everybody.
Thanks, John. That makes me wish I was still there, actually. Suzanne, would you like to sort of draw things together?
Yeah, thanks, Sahir. So, I mean, just to repeat, I think thanks, everybody. That was a really useful, very enjoyable and helpful meeting in terms of thinking what the opportunities are and some of what we could do. We will. I think the ideal thing is that we keep these meetings going, so we can come back together, like reassess, look at what other developments have occurred, share ideas again, and we've got a vision there of what we could be doing, and hopefully we'll be able to deliver it. I mean, I think just a quick reminder. You know, I think when the unions, well, people were talking about there about involving people beyond our usual suspects. I think people do care. You can't, you know, the majority of people are extremely worried about what is going on. Look at the floods that have just happened in here. We talked about Spain, the floods that just happened here in the UK, and what's happening to people's homes, lives, and livelihoods in that context. So people are worried, but not sure what to do. And that's why an element of what we have to do, a big element of what we have to do, is still about raising awareness, and keep raising awareness, because if we don't, there will be a vacuum and somebody will fill it with an explanation about what is going on. The far right saying it's not a climate crisis, or, you know, whatever other interpretation. We have a responsibility to keep raising awareness about this, and that we can still address this if we're able to mobilize the power. A few things came into my head. It's great to hear this a sort of a broad agreement coming together around the focus on Brazil. It's an opportunity to launch. I really liked what I'm so sorry, what Phil was saying earlier on. And one of the things about the meeting that happened in his workplace, so one of the things I missed out of our motion is to work with other unions in climate campaigns and encourage members to support outward-facing monthly workplace events during the year of trade union climate action, including monthly webinars, action on extreme weather. So each union could have a sort of program of activities, and we could collaborate, you know, opportunities, moments to collaborate that fit in terms of the particular unions. There's a lot of great things we could do. Three final things for me. Pensions. Yeah, that could be very important. Rachel Reeves got some appalling plans for local government pensions. I mean, really terrifying plans for local government pensions. You know, that may be a way of the thing being more generalized across the union, but we could still keep that a focus in terms of divestment. What do we want? Because she's about to hand them over to big pension corporations that will invest it in every big pile of shit, including Thames Water, you know, that is about to go, privatized companies are about to go belly up. UCU, a real shout out to UCU comrades and friends. Please, can we get UCU on board with the Year of Trade Union Climate campaigning, as well as the work that UCU are doing in terms of their own reach out to learners, etc. But at this minute in time, I kind of let's get a motion through. It strikes me, Liz was saying, from the bottom as well as up to national conferences, we probably should have just a nice general motion that people can take into their own union branches to support the TUC, vote for a year of climate campaigning. What can our local trade union branch be doing? And people have made some great comments in the chat. And Phil mentioned it about the kind of local collaborations that can be done. All of that will build momentum and root it in the branches and trade union work and workplaces. So maybe we should do that. And then a couple of fine things to me. I obviously we need a just transition in terms of workers in carbon industries, but let's not frame the climate issue within the trade union movement as a just transition issue, because it isn't. It's a climate crisis issue. Back to what Liz was saying, why we fought so hard for that, for the whole trade union movement in terms of our workplaces, our livelihoods across the board, and our basic future on this planet. And it's really important for the reasons that Liz says, that it's not framed simply as a just transition issue. I don't mean to say we don't want to collaborate and fight hard for just transition. And then final thing for me is, on conferences. I think sector conferences can be really helpful as a way of doing what people were saying, to reach out beyond the activists who make it their day-to-day work. That's what we found when we had our education conference. That was in 2019. It did have the backdrop of the climate strikes and the XR rebellion. But it was really good. But just to comment on that, is that we were in a lucky position in the NEU of it be passed at a national level, but a willingness of the National Union to work with the activists. So it was never simply a top-down conference. There was a kind of group of us who met as lay activists, supported by the union's infrastructures. And I think that really sort of shaped the nature of the conference. So that's something to think about. I think they could. And just thinking through, if we did do those kind of things, we could, there's a possibility there, isn't it? We meet sectorially and then we come together. Anyway, I like to think big too, Liz, as well. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. That was so very, very helpful and inspiring. Good, great.
Okay, well, thank you, Suzanne. And I thoroughly can concur with that. And I think there's a lot of food for thought there for what we need to plan and what we need to do over the coming months. So we'll all be in touch, no doubt, and probably continuing these meetings as well periodically to make sure we continue this discussion. Suzanne, you've got a hand raised there.
I'm so sorry, because there was one other thing. Is again, it was what Phil was raising. That international solidarity that we could build is just so important. And those communication with activists and trade unionists from other countries, Brazil and wider. I mean, that is so crucial, and that could really make something much more significant out of this work.
And Liz,
that's given me one last thought as well. If we can't get Greta Thunberg to conferences, we might be able to get a live link with international campaigners and things like that. We've done live links of international guest speakers at conferences before, but actually you can quite often get them in your branches as well. And people love that kind of thing in a local branch or a regional meeting. If you could get an activist from Brazil on the run up to COP30 coming to speak to your branch, it could be a real mobiliser. Just thought I'd throw that in as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz. I've got to let my wife in. She's ringing the bell. So I'll leave you to say goodbye to each other. My apologies.
Bye, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Thanks for organising the meeting.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, here.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. We'll stay in touch with next steps.